All right, good morning, good afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Mitchell's Kitchen in this case. There's a little bit of a story to how we got into this kitchen. One of the beautiful things of working for a startup is that you get to plan everything carefully with a small group of people. But in our case, we had to drastically change everything last minute. So the idea of doing a rooftop webinar with a view in the background is amazing until you realize that it's pretty windy on a rooftop. And there's also a few clouds out there, and every now and then there's a cloud in front of the sun, and everything gets dark, and then it gets light again, which messed up the video and then the audio with the wind. So here we are. Thank you, Mitchell, for having us in your place. Unfortunately, Stephen was also supposed to be here. Well, again, plans change. Stephen unfortunately had to fix a bug, and he won't be able to join us. But that won't stop us from telling you more about what's going on in the framework. But Mitchell, maybe you can briefly explain why the hell we got on Gran Canaria in the first place.
Well, I think that question has a lot to do, Allard, with why I got here in the first place. I was kind of fed up with the weather in the Netherlands, and I was very sure I didn't want to be there. So I started moving around, and I found this beautiful island. It's called the Island of Eternal Spring, Gran Canaria. And, well, my colleagues caught up, and then we decided to have our kickoff week of this year, a week in which we all gather in one place, even though we are remote, here on Gran Canaria. And this is all great in theory, but weather is weather. And even though I have seen many beautiful days here on Gran Canaria, this week has been less than ideal. So hence again, then we moved inside, and I have to welcome AxonIQ into my kitchen. My girlfriend is gonna love the remodeling we have done to achieve this.
To make this work.
Yeah,
but we'll put most of it back. Don't worry. All right. So for our viewers, maybe it's good to do a very brief introduction of ourselves. Maybe Marco, you can briefly start.
Yes, of course. I'm Marco. I'm in the Axon software team. We're currently working on DCB. The details will be something for later. Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm Mitchell Herrijkers. I have been with AxonIQ for like 3-4 years now, something like that. And I am the lead developer on AxonIQ Console to facilitate monitoring of the Axon framework applications and also Axon server instances.
And I'm Allard, also partially replacing Stephen in this case, but I started the Axon framework as a little experiment about, 16 years ago. Got a little bit out of control, and instead of spending a few hours a week on it, we now spend a lot of time all together on that stuff. And that's wonderful. So yeah, of course, this webinar is about what's cooking in AxonIQ's kitchen right now. Sorry, that was just too easy to not do. Well, I think the topic that's being discussed most in social media, but also at conferences I've heard, and there's even some words in a book that recently appeared about event sourcing, is DCB, right? A great little acronym, a TLA as it's called, a 3-letter acronym. But there is, of course, a lot of meaning to it. And for those not familiar with what DCB is, basically what we're doing is, as our former colleague Sarah Pellegrini called it so nicely, killing the aggregate, right? Getting rid of the aggregate. And I was absolutely convinced that was not possible until she explained me what the plan was and what the idea was behind it. And then we started to all in the company refine the idea. So essentially, it's about taking a string of events, right? The events that happen within a system, within an organization, whatever ideally they're the same. And instead of trying to cut them down into different streams for aggregates, we just keep them as one big stream. And whenever we want to make a decision, we very carefully and very smart select whatever we need to make that decision, right? So we can gather everything as one stream. Sounds like a crazy idea, Marco, you've been working on that for quite a while. First, of course, in basements, no, just below the radar, right? Just figuring stuff out. But more recently, you've also done some experiments. Can you shed a bit of light on what we've been up to in that space?
I have to do so. So DCB is quite a challenge for Axon Server because until now, Axon Server has only one big index, the aggregate ID. But since we want to kill the aggregate, this is getting a lot more complex. And we came up with some solutions more than a year ago, and we worked really hard to make them reality. And recently we tested to check, is it feasible performance-wise? And the answer is yes. We want to be at least as fast as in the past, and currently that is a given. So we're in a good mood in that regard. Of course, nothing is done yet that we can present, but this will not be too long. But it's not only performance. We need to make sure that what we build is correct. That's why we write tests. But we also need to be sure that it's powerful enough. And that's why we write small applications, or test applications, to see, is the concept thought out correctly? Did we miss anything? That's what we're currently working on, fixing plenty of bugs and some missing features. Some time ago, we met in Novi Sad with 8 people, and had a very focused week, pushing this forward, and now we're in the finishing phase. That will be quite some time until it's done, but we have a lot of work to do there. We do have other things that we do in Axon Server at the moment, but the main thing is DCB. One of the other things that is not in Axon Server but related to DCB is the framework, because we will need to have support of DCB in the framework. So what's going on there?
Yeah, that's actually upcoming in Axon 5. So we've been working quite hard on a lot of the little things, I always say, because obviously there's always people around asking, hey, where can we try things out? But we're doing a lot of things quite drastically different in the core of the framework. And that's going to sound really scary. Actually, it's a lot more scary for the people working on framework than it is for the people working with framework, strange enough, because we do all these things below in the depth of the framework so that on the outside, you don't have to change as much, which I'll explain in a little bit. But some of the things that we're changing is, well, first of all, support for DCB, right? So some of the interfaces of, let's say, the core components will change a little bit to be more flexible around loading events, where you don't have to pass an aggregate identifier or a stream ID anymore to load events, but you can specify a type of query, a selector, right? A criteria, as we call it. What other criteria that events need to meet in order to be relevant for your decision? And obviously, there's a lot of interesting side effects that come out of that. We recently had a nice discussion about snapshots. How do snapshots work if you don't have a clear identifier of what to snapshot? And that was a really fun challenge to tackle, but I think we got it done, and now it's time to prove that we did so. So that's some of the things that we're working on, and the rest, yeah, Axon Framework 5 is going to be much more around parallelization of tasks. So where Axon 4 still makes quite a lot of assumptions on, hey, when this method call finished in an event handler, for example, event handling has finished. Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe there's still an external call, and now you're forced to block that thread from waiting until the external call finished. So how can you let the framework know that you've got some long-running tasks going on in the background that you want to wait for completion without blocking any threads and that kind of stuff. So that's also what we're doing in the framework. One other aspect, and this is why down below we're changing a lot of APIs, and for those who ever ventured in the depths of Axon Framework, you have the unit of work, as we call it. That one has been turned upside down, inside out, and reversed in all possible directions. But what we're going to do is we're going to stack different layers, let's say, of APIs, right? So if you want to use real low-level APIs, that's fine. You can do that, right? If you want to make some changes or build your own components, then you can do that. But if you want to stick around and, hey, I love Axon 4, I just want the new version, you can still do that too. You can still use the annotations. You can still put an aggregate annotation on a class. Just go and tell Sarah. And it still works like it does before, because DCB, strange enough, is completely 100% backwards compatible with the thought of aggregates. It's just that it gives you more flexibility. And actually, of course, we never know how people are going to use it, but we do expect a lot of people to still want to use aggregates. But what you don't want is to be stuck to that aggregate for the rest of your life, your career, or the application's life cycle, whichever is the longest of those. You just don't want to be stuck with the aggregate boundaries that you chose on day one. So those are things that we're doing in the framework. But of course, Axon Server and Axon Framework are not the only products that have seen quite a bit of change, and not too distant from the framework is console. What have you been working on?
Yeah, well, what we have been cooking is a completely new user interface. So when we demoed the AxonIQ console on our AxonIQ conference about, 5 months ago, the interface looked completely different. And sometimes you know the interior of your house just doesn't really work, and you want to reorder it, but you don't know how, and you need experimentation to do it, and suddenly something clicks. And I feel like we have achieved that with the AxonIQ console UI. It was actually a moment, a day when we were working on that, and I was behind the computer, and I was like, yeah, this is the way to go. Where console had originally had a tab-based approach, which feels very much like the 90s. We've switched to a very different approach.
The 90s? Sorry.
1994, my birth year. Yeah, no, I think that was Windows 3.1. That's too far back. But I think it didn't happen. But the user interface looks a lot better. It has a dark mode. It supports ultra-wide screens. And of course, we keep working on integrating better with Axon Framework and Axon Server at all times. We now have Axon Server health monitoring. You can pay for your Axon Server licenses in very easy way with credit cards, with PayPal, with invoice-based structures. We make Axon Server accessible for everyone, and then we make the Axon Framework applications understandable for everyone. That is the goal. And we are still working on that. One of our customers, for example, gave us the feedback that if a message was stuck in a thread, then it wouldn't update the latency. The latency would disappear in the UI, and then there would be no notification at all that something was wrong. So we changed that. We have last week introduced a new latency concept, which takes the currently processing message it takes that as a time. So if a message is stuck, the time will go up and you will see something is wrong. That's about what's been cooking on AxonIQ console.
Just out of curiosity, I know we looked up some statistics before coming here to talk to our colleagues. So we are currently, most of AxonIQ is around this neighborhood right now. We silently escaped through the back door to get here to do this webinar. But we got some statistics. And how many releases or deployments did you do into production of console last year?
We did 142 releases to production last year.
That's 142. That's one every other day. Of course, some people would argue, there's companies that do 20 a day. Yeah, those companies have a slightly bigger workforce than we have working on console. But that's a deployment every day, which is really cool. But it also, Marco, how many releases did your team do last year? I hope not 140, because that would be quite full.
I'd say 10.
Right about 10.
Yeah. With patch releases, about 10.
So there's of course 3 major releases that are planned, right? And there's always little issues. We do a little bit. We do see a little bit of an uptake in the number of CVEs that appear as well, right? That force us to provide patch releases that resolve some of those CVEs in libraries that we use, which is
We migrated to Spring Boot 3 and Spring Security 6 in the latest LTS release, and that got rid of not all, but a lot of the CVEs, and now we're up to date again. So quite happy about that.
Yeah, that was a good move. Not extremely easy in all cases because everything ties in quite intensely with all the Spring, right? It's not your typical Spring application.
Yeah. Open Rewrite did a great job there.
All right. So, what besides DCB? Of course, DCB is one of the bigger things that's happening, right? But DCB is not a very quick just 2025.0 kind of quickly let's get something out released. This is something that we're continuously working on. But what are some things that we could expect in the next few releases? What are little smaller elements that we're working on?
Some of them have already started, but are not that big to market. Like we improved scaling. One of our customers said, "Yeah, I've connected about 300 to 500 applications to a single context. Things slow down." We never tested with 500 applications. So we did test with an application, and indeed, it was getting slower. Then we found a bug, and we fixed it. And now with up to 900 applications, it works perfectly fine. We didn't go beyond that for financial reasons to test, because they don't get expensive. The other one is that we're working on a new index that is more lightweight, even for large installations, and people will need less memory, so the machines get cheaper. Other than that, we do have a new Grafana dashboard. I always forget that, so I want to honor the work of we have new metrics since the last year about, but we haven't updated the Grafana dashboard. Now it's out, and it looks way better. It's easier to gain insights, and there's a good bunch of explanation in the dashboard integrated. So we don't need to have the documentation somewhere else where it gets lost.
So you mentioned index, which is a very interesting topic. One could wonder, why do you have an index in the first place, right? Because you have got aggregates, so we have a stream ID, we just provide the events for that stream, we just go, right? There's nothing to it. So why, could you elaborate on why there was this necessity? Where did it come from? And why do we, there's already two indexes, right? Currently, isn't that already one too many, right? And why do we need a third one? And is this the one going to replace the other ones, or is it just in certain cases?
So let's start with what index actually does. We need to find the events of a given aggregate really fast out of many billions of other events that we're not interested in. And that's basically one of the use cases if you want to resource your aggregate to find stuff, but also to check uniqueness, like with the aggregate creation policy, creative missing, I think it's called. We need to do a uniqueness check on all aggregate IDs ever in the past, and that might be expensive depending on how many there are. We have customers with billions of aggregates. But it will be the new one or another one. We don't know yet. We think it should be the new one, but then again, it is still young. It needs to prove itself. It will be cheaper to run, but we'll see.
But the expectation is that we can replace the other two. Yes. It's just that
in the long run, that
the
will
proof
be
is missing, and it's. Is it dramatically different? Is there a relationship between that index and DCB?
There is a relationship.
Not surprising.
Yeah. We actually came up with the stuff in DCB first, and then a customer with a lot of aggregates called us, there's something wrong, and we investigated that we need to have a new index. Then, hey, you can use the index from DCB in a slightly different form for exactly that. And that's what we did. It works really good. We'll see how fast the adoption will be, because that will require re-indexing once. Yeah. And that will take some time depending on how large the event store is.
Just to give an impression, I mean, we're talking about large event stores, right? And I'm involved in a lot of pre-sales conversations, so I get these questions a lot of people that say, well, we're expecting a large base, right? And I say, okay, what is large to you, right? Because well, literally some of them say we'll have thousands of events per day. So, okay, that's large. And others will say we'll have thousands of events per second. Okay, that's also a large. It's a different order of magnitude of large. But when you're talking about large, well, you said billions of aggregates already, so I'm guessing you're hinting towards rather the second type of large rather than the first one.
I think we test with 25,000 events per second over a long time, basically until the volume of 40 terabytes is full. And then we check if everything works fine.
Yeah, so basically 40 terabytes of events is what we see as a good baseline test for the kind of software that we built. Right. What about volumes in console? I mean, I know that you've been quite stressful in a certain period of time when a certain group of people decided that, hey, that's quite useful. Let me switch that on a few more applications.
Yeah, that's kind of an understatement, I would say. Stressed, it's always interesting, like if you are in a mode of overcapacity, if your servers are overloaded, it's very hard to intervene because whenever you do a deployment, there are suddenly less pods, it's more overloaded. So you need to find a solution to that. Luckily we did. Right now we're processing about 100,000 reports per minute, which is quite a sizable user base for AxonIQ Console. And all those metrics are stored for 10 minutes in short-term storage and are then processed into our large-term storage, and we will keep all that data for 30 days. That was quite a technical challenge, but it's fun to do. Normally, you know, as a software engineer, I get like the problems we try to solve, like the things you solve with event modeling. But in this case, you can't solve a statistical process or a data performance problem with event modeling. You need to dig into like JSON serialization, into compressing data and all that kind of stuff. So that was fun. But the system cannot handle more than ever. We're processing 100,000 reports at like 20 or 25% capacity. So I think we can have a few more large user bases connect without me stressing out.
All right. So if you're watching this, you don't have to feel sorry for Mitchell or team if you decide to connect your few thousand applications that you're running in production, because those are production systems. That was actually quite interesting. We did anticipate a few production environments, but also a lot more developer environments to be connected, right? Where we thought, people will connect and then they will disconnect and reconnect, and you can see the message flows as you're working on a system. But it's actually being used quite a lot for production monitoring as well. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's being used a lot for production monitoring, message flow visualization, and with the latest monitoring extensions, which you can put notifications into Slack, PagerDuty, webhooks, and email. Like it's all become way more usable for our users and easier to alert on. So, well, if you want to try it out and you succeed in overloading the servers, I might send you a gift. Challenge me.
That sounds good. Speaking of gifts, what other features are you? What's the status of console, and how are we? What can we expect in the time to come?
Well, I've never heard someone say that a software project is done, and console isn't either. So we want to integrate more with the educational experience that our users need when onboarding into our AxonIQ products. We can do much better there, and we are working on that. And part of that is education. Part of that is explaining better what's going wrong in their application. And we're also thinking of helping people with modeling through AxonIQ Console. That's not going to be there for sure, but we are definitely thinking about that. Other things that we want to do is make it easier to run Axon framework applications. So what I'm talking about is the tools that most people would consider being there in a toolbox. So I'm thinking about things like making a thread dump of your application so you can see where your event processor is stuck, or being able to query an aggregate and visualizing the event model of that aggregate and its snapshot state to see where your state went wrong at what point in time. Tools like that are the extensions that we are seeking for AxonIQ Console, and I don't think we will ever stop developing them because there's so much that users can, we can help our users with that I think we should.
So what is your biggest source of inspiration for all of those new features?
Well, it was my own frustration with the framework. Before I joined AxonIQ, I actually wrote an open source library called Axon OpenAdmin, and that was basically a React application that hid Axon framework instances behind a load balancer. I did 10 REST calls per second, and that means if you have 5 Axon framework applications, statistically you will probably hit every one of them every second or every 2 seconds. So you have the status in the front end, and then you can decide, okay, if I split or merge this token, then I know I have to call this node. So now I send a header with this node name, and I just keep hitting the load balancer with this node name until one of the nodes says it's done. Well, I think you agree that that can be much more streamlined, but then you need a central server to streamline that. So we have built a backend on the backbone of Axon Server, where Axon Server does the route finding for all the commands you do. So if you in the web interface click stop processor, then AxonIQ Console knows, all right, I have those 4 nodes, all 4 need to stop that processor. Node A is connected to that AxonIQ Console instance, that one to that, that one to that, that one to that. I'm gonna send the messages through Axon Server to those instances to send a message back to the application. And that works wonders. Like, I wouldn't want to live without that. It's amazing.
So AxonIQ Console was born out of your own frustrations. Now you don't build Axon framework applications as much as you used to, although Console is also an Axon framework application. Yes. Which, how do you monitor Console, by the way?
We are monitoring Console with Console.
That's pretty cool. So it's self-monitoring, which theoretically is quite problematic, but it does work in practice.
It does work, yeah.
So it was your own frustration that led to Console, but now you develop less. So we are definitely curious about your frustrations as well. I mean, you, as you build Axon framework applications, so that share your frustrations with Mitchell, so that he can get frustrated about your frustrations and then fix them in Console as well. And then you said something similar, right? We had a customer who had billions of aggregates, and well, we actually have a lot of customers with billions of aggregates, but this specific customer had billions of active aggregates, which is quite challenging. So there's always patterns of use that we didn't anticipate, right? So that feedback is very important, and I want to use that a little bit to segue. You might see me looking down every now and then, because there is a chat function in YouTube. And you can use that to ask us questions. So I'm monitoring the chat panel if there's anything you are curious about, because we have a little bit of time left, but not too much.
Well, I have a question for you.
Oh, that's great.
What are you doing on Axon Framework 5?
What am I doing? Well, I'm coding. Did you?
Yeah, I noticed. I saw some commits flying by, and I was like, he's bored.
I'm no, it's once a coder, always a coder, right? There's I definitely well, there's a lot of things I need to do in day-to-day life that are unfortunately also part of my job, but I still get to do quite a lot of stuff on Axon 5. I definitely like to be involved in the API discussions, and I have a few demo applications that as soon as we have an idea, I plug it into those demos to see if it works. In that particular use case, I don't have as many as Marco and team has, with different strategies and ways. But no, I still like to be involved, and yeah, framework is, it's ultimately something I started, and I want to keep on working on that. So yeah, there's always ideas. I've also worked on projects in the past, and I still use Axon. I still visit a lot of customers, and I see their frustrations, or sometimes it's not even their frustrations. They're entirely happy with what they're doing, and I'm looking at this, and you shouldn't be happy with this. You should hate this stuff, right? You shouldn't have to do all this to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And in some cases, they have to inject a repository into a command handler to load another aggregate because you need to state the two aggregates to make a decision. Well, that's DCB, right? There it comes. But you don't want the DCB approach to be, again, injecting all sorts of infrastructure components. So that's what we're working on to make actually the goal of Axon version 1 was already to separate the functionals from the non-functionals and write as much as you can functional code, just business logic. And of course, you have some non-functional requirements as well. You want to do some tweaking and tuning, but you don't want to mix the code for the two. You want to keep that other code separate where you pass in the configuration. Axon 1 did a lousy job. Axon 2 did a terrible job. Axon 3 did a slightly better job. Axon 4, well, and Axon 5 is going to be fantastic. Of course, we're going to find another way, even better, and continue. But that's what I'm doing on Axon framework. And of course, fortunately, I'm not doing it alone. So those new features, parallelism, and things that we're working on is a team effort. But there's no reliance on me to be available to actually do some coding. Right, in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to pop them in the chat. I do have one tricky question that I will just ask so that nobody has to do that online. They know I'm going to ask it, so that's fine. But we've been talking about what's coming, and DCB. We get the same question over and over again. Is first of all, of course, there's a lot of reluctance. Is this going to work? Well, we address that. We test that continuously, and so far it looks like yes. Theoretically, it was going to work, absolutely going to work, and now we see practically that it's also going to work. But when can people expect, let's say, something that they could use in terms of DCB? Can you say something about that?
Earlier, I said we're in the finishing phase. Maybe that was overselling it a bit. It will take some time. There are still a lot of things that need to be finished, but we expect early summer to have a release with DCB in it. There won't be all features in it there yet, but that will be the first thing that we can ship and people can start using.
So it will not be the whole thing, but it will be solid. So whatever we get.
We want to make it right.
Yeah.
There's no way in shipping half-finished software to all our customers that rely on it.
Yeah. So it's an MVP, but it has to be V. It has to be viable, yes, right? There's no half viable products. And, I could ask the same about console, but that. How far ahead do you look at with console anyway?
Well, I think I'm having an allergic reaction to the question. So we are a SaaS product, and we do everything in our power to deliver features quick, but also well. So they come when they come, and I think it's important that they come quickly. But I cannot share any dates like the aggregate inspection. Well, Q1 or Q2 this year, it will probably be there, but will it be March, will it be May? I don't know.
And I guess it also depends a little bit on community pressure, right? If there's a lot of demand for a specific one, we tend to prioritize that over the rest. And so that's another hint towards everybody that yes, it does help to give us feedback on what it is that you need. Right. As you notice, I've got the same allergic reaction to the question, but still, I'll ask myself right about Axon 5. It is very difficult to predict because we did change a lot of the internals. We took really the heart of Axon. We replaced that in a different way. We're currently working on the configuration modules. So in Axon 4, the configuration is pretty pretty large, right? There's like this one configuration thing for all of your Axon application, and we want to make that a lot smaller. We want to make those much smaller blocks, so you can define, oh, I have a command handling component, whatever that means to you, right? It could be half of your application. It could also just be a few handlers that you want to group together and call those the little command handling components, and you tweak and tune the configuration for those. And you could have another command handling component that you tweak and tune slightly differently. And we're going to change the tweaking and tuning as well. So instead of saying, okay, we've got Spring Boot auto configuration, it will work automatically unless you want something different. In that case, you provide it yourself. So you want to tweak and tune one little aspect, and now you have to define your entire command bus yourself. We want to change that so it becomes much easier to just tune one parameter. Say, hey, I want the default thing except for this, which I want different. So that's the kind of approach we're going to take. And that makes it much easier to work with pretty interesting, let's say Spring projects as an example of a Spring modulith, right? Where it organizes already your application into different modules. Well, you can define them in such a module, say, oh, this is a command handler and it has a projection, and we auto-configure it as we can, and then take your tunes and tweaks to modify them. Anything you want to add before there's a question here? But,
No, when you were talking about the configuration API, I was taking back to a meeting we had a few weeks ago with you, Milan, and I. And I have to say the new configuration API is going to be a game changer. I don't know how many beans I have in my applications that are the complete bus, and now you would be able to just tweak a small part of it. And I think that will be a very good way to configure the framework.
Reminds me of a small migration. This is actually a good segue into the question, but reminds me of when we introduced Axon 4. I was helping a client to migrate from Axon 3 to Axon 4, and we basically went to the configuration, the class where they started the configuration, and it was, okay, that you can remove, that you can remove, that you can remove, that you can remove. And from the entire class, there was just one method left to to make sure that the event processor had the right number of threads on it. And I hope that will be the same for Axon 5. But this is actually a good bridge into the question. I see that the message was retracted and then replaced by another question to slightly modify the question. Thank you, Jacob, for that question. So the new one is, how will DCB in Axon 5 affect the traditional way aggregates we had until version 4? Not too much, strangely enough, right? If you want to work with aggregates, if you want to put aggregate on an annotation, that's perfectly fine. You might expect some people to come hunting for you, but you should be able to do so. The biggest difference is in the use of Axon Server mainly as an event store. You're not stuck anymore to that aggregate. If you decide on Monday that is a good aggregate, or you've already decided that, and then Tuesday comes and you think, wait a minute, that doesn't belong here, it is much easier to change your structure, because you have no events to restructure, no restreaming or is there a word for it? Restructuring your streams or whatever, refactoring your streams, right? You can just change that. So we expect that the changes are mostly positive, and that's what we're testing as well. Obviously, anything you want to add to that?
One of the first things we set as one of the laws when designing Axon Server with DCB is, how do we want to ensure that it is backwards compatible with the aggregate approach? And we said it needs to be as fast as back then, but we also ensured we need to support all the functionality, because not everyone wants or needs DCB. So this is one of the cornerstones of the new Axon Server design, that it will always support the aggregates in that sense that we currently have.
Exactly.
The DCB is just an addition that you can do on top of it.
So,
Yeah, I think the same goes for Axon Framework. I personally love Axon Framework 4. So whenever we are in these meetings, I'm trying to conserve all the things that were in there a little bit. Like, I do want to be able to have an aggregate. I personally love aggregate Sarah. I'm sorry. Um, although they have their faults, they are not perfect, but they do have their merit. I do see reason for the DCB approach, but I have to see it to believe it. So I do want Axon Framework 5 to be at least contain what Axon Framework 4 has. So we do ask ourselves questions like, are we able to conserve the current functionality and in what way? Sometimes that is by defining a different interface. Sometimes it will be by enabling the users to keep the old functionality through legacy modules.
and I'll add one or two words where yes, DCB, dynamic consistency boundaries, is a fundamentally different way of thinking about event sourcing. But you don't have to apply it fundamentally differently than you apply event sourcing now. And even though it does give you a lot of flexibility and you can go completely crazy on the criteria and mixing and matching events, in practice, we don't expect that to happen. We expect people to still have, let's say, some aggregate-like constructs, and maybe instead of one aggregate for the whole thing, you'll just have two separate ones that use the same identifier. But mostly we expect that to be used for flexibility, right? One day I thought that this was a great aggregate boundary, right? The order made perfect sense. We talk about an order and it's confirmed and it's this, and we add items and it sounds like an aggregate. Let's use that as an aggregate. And then later on you figure out, hey, wait, there's different aspects to it that are important. Let's split it, or let's. In some cases, I don't care just about the order. I care about something else as well. Well, now you have the opportunity to grab that and handle it transactionally. So I hope that answers your question. So it's lots of differences, unless you don't want to. There's always Mitchell to make sure that it's.
The DCB approach, like the pitch you did yesterday with the presentation and the reordering, maybe you'll do that online one day. That's really starting to convince me. So maybe I'll use Axon Framework 5 after all.
Maybe we should just stop with that cliffhanger and just call it a day. All right. Let's see if we get some more questions popping in, and otherwise we'll actually call it a day and really stop with that cliffhanger. Any last comments, last things you want to say to whoever is watching this whenever they watch it?
I think we leave it with the cliffhanger. I like it.
Yeah, it's a great cliffhanger. So maybe one day we'll talk more about DCB. And I want to thank you for watching. If you made it all the way here, that's great. And if you haven't, you're not going to see this anyway, so we can say whatever we want. And we hope to hear from you. Let us know as soon as something comes out. We're very curious about your feedback, and we'll come back. So last thing, just in time, just to ruin the cliffhanger. Will there be a conference this year? Oh yes. Do we know when? Looking at the producer, who's always backstage. No, we don't have a definitive date on it. It is always at the end of September. Just keep the end of September available, and then you'll be fine. But there will definitely be a conference, and we're gonna make sure it'll be fun. So mark your calendars. We'll let you know when. All right, thanks a lot. Have a great rest of the day, and hope to hear from you soon. Bye.
See you.